We're here with Dr. Doss to talk about experts, since Dr. Doss is an expert, and you have, from what I understand, actually been an expert called to courts to testify on behalf or after evaluating different defendants and patients.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I do mostly criminal trials, but also occasionally civil trials. So what Amber Heard and Johnny Depp are going through is a civil trial. And yeah, so I would be asked to assess the defendant if it's a criminal trial, often in prison, give my psychiatric assessment, and then the evidence that I give, either in the form of a court report, will be used in the trial, or if the judge wants to hear from me personally, then I get sworn in, go to the witness box, and I'll give evidence as a psychiatric expert. Yeah.
Okay, now a couple things on that. One, when you're hired, you're usually hired by either the defense or the prosecution. And is this dependent on your diagnosis matching what their case happens to be?
That is the ultimate question, and I'm glad you raised that because I actually think it's very relevant to Johnny Depp's case, which we'll come on to. No, so the answer to that is that all expert witnesses are supposed to be 100% objective and neutral. And you could say that in some cases it could be seen there could be a potential conflict of interest. So sometimes I'm instructed by the defense, less often by the prosecution. So in the UK, it's the Crown Prosecution Service. But I should only be writing my report to the court, to the judge. So no matter who's paying me, my conclusion should only be to assist the judge to give him knowledge in the area that he's not an expert in, and I am an expert in, which is psychiatric diagnosis. But I do think that there are what I call cowboy experts. There are definitely some have a reputation, some I can just tell by reading their reports they're not balanced and they're not objective, who definitely try and get a finding to lean towards or twist the evidence to lean towards the people that are instructing them. And simply, in my opinion, they simply do this for money. So the more they do, the more instructions they get, the more money they make. But it is unethical.
Okay, so but what you just described is still depending. I mean, somebody could be ethical, but still sway. There are gray areas, and
Yeah.
if it's at 50%, you can say, well, it's positive or 50%. Oh, it's negative, depending on which way you tilt. In your system, is it a case where if you get hired, and they can't just say, oh, I don't want it anymore? I don't like that result, so it goes away?
Uh, when you're instructed by a solicitor, you write a report and it belongs to the solicitor unless and until they decide to submit it to the court. So I've never had this happen to me personally, but in theory, the solicitor could ask for an opinion, read it, and think this doesn't really help my client at all, and then choose not to submit it. And if they haven't submitted it as a formal piece of evidence, then it doesn't exist. It's not relevant to the trial, so nobody else is allowed to use it. For example, even the other side isn't allowed to use it. However, once they submit it, then it's a formal piece of court evidence. So they do have the option of
They can shop around.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. They can shop around. They can't tell me, although solicitors have tried, I've definitely experienced this. They're not allowed to tell me, I don't like this and I'd like you to change your opinion to this. But they can say, I don't like this report. Let's try another psychiatrist and pay them more.
I'm also going to place a bet, and tell me if this ever happens, that they might sort of imply to you something that they think or a conclusion they may have drawn, and they just want to verify if this is true.
Yeah,
in other
absolutely.
words, frame it, in a perfect manner for you before you get it.
Yeah, they're allowed to. They do that, and to be honest, even though it is bordering on a grey area of being kind of unethical, they are allowed to do that. So I wouldn't say frequently, but every once in a while, they will say, thank you for your report. They're always very polite. Thank you for your report. We can see that you've included X, Y, and Z. Would you consider that possibly another alternative might be blah, blah, blah? So yeah, they frame it like that, and they're allowed to. That's within the rules.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and start to visit the two experts in this trial. We have, I believe it's Dr. Curry and Dr. Hughes.
Yep.
And we'll start with the prosecution, and that's Dr. Curry. And I would love to hear your observations in both how she reported and the veracity in what she came up with.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot that a lot of areas with what Dr. Curry said that I have issues with. Is that fair to say? Yeah, that I'm sort of
Sure.
skeptical about. So one of the things, first of all, diagnosing Amber Heard with borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. So I think the point that, well, first of all,
I thought it was histrionic and borderline.
sorry, you're right. Sorry, it's histrionic. We were talking about narcissistic in the previous thing.
No
You
worries.
confused me. Yeah. So first of all, are these diagnoses valid? I think it's always a little bit dodgy when somebody's making a diagnosis for a legal situation, because when it's a clinical situation,
Mhm.
the patient is going to, more often than not, they're going to be accurate. They're going to tell the truth because they're suffering from these symptoms and they want treatment. If it's a clinical situation, then either the expert or the subject themselves, as in the person that's being examined, if they wanted to, they could kind of bend the truth a little bit to make it suit them. So that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical. I always take with a pinch of salt anything that's kind of brought up in a legal frame. So that's one thing I would say. I think what the diagnoses that she made does tie into the allegations of what Amber Heard has done. As to whether Amber Heard did do those things is a whole other topic that I think is up for the court to decide, not for the expert to decide. But Shannon Curry is suggesting that she is explosive in her arguments, which is exactly what a borderline personality disorder looks like, has this massive fear of being abandoned and is therefore forcing Johnny Depp back into this relationship, even if it's toxic. And again, that's exactly what somebody with borderline would do. And somebody with histrionic personality disorder needs to be the center of attention, is very kind of dramatic in their actions. And again, that is what she's alleged of doing. Now, I keep using this word alleged because I don't think we really know how accurate any of that reporting is. However, I think that Shannon Curry has gone a little bit beyond her role and beyond her station. And so has the other expert, by the way, I'm sure we'll come on to, Dawn Hughes, by suggesting quite clearly that she believes that Johnny Depp is the aggressor and that he's committed interpersonal violence. And I think that is.
Yeah, we'll get to Dawn. I want to go through
That's
Shannon.
done. Yeah. Sorry. And the other thing that I would say is, what is the point of making that diagnosis of personality disorder? Does it really matter? Because a personality disorder just explains that kind of behavior happens frequently with somebody that has that personality disorder. But that's actually not what this case is about. It's about whether she committed that abuse or not. So I'm actually writing an episode myself on my YouTube channel. I made this analogy. Say you had a criminal trial and there was a drunk driver who ran somebody over and killed them. The point of the trial, what the judge is trying to decide, is whether that person was drink driving at the time. Whether that person was drink driving, whether they killed that person at the time. If you get an expert to say they're an alcoholic, right, then that helps you put their behavior into context, as in this person drinks a lot and drink drives a lot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they did it on that particular occasion.
Mm.
So being an alcoholic is not against the law, but drink driving, killing somebody is against the law. So in the same way, I think diagnosing this personality disorder is not actually really that relevant, because that just says that these people have these type of behaviors typically.
Could it
That's
be,
not what's
though,
important.
because of her assignment? Her assignment, from what I understand, was, does this person have PTSD, yes or no? And the overall case is whether or not she's a liar or
Yeah.
she's perpetuated a hoax.
Yeah.
Would a personality disorder make it less or more likely that somebody would be creating a hoax?
I think you could argue that having a personality disorder would make it slightly more likely that they would be creating a hoax, but only slightly more likely. But again, I think that's a red herring. It's about whether she did or
Okay.
not about whether the personality disorder made her more likely to do that or not.
Mm.
I think the PTSD is slightly different, and the reason I say it is this: is that personality disorder only explains Amber Heard's behavior, whereas PTSD is like a psychiatric injury that's
Mhm.
caused or allegedly caused by somebody else. So it's slightly different. The other thing I wanted to say is that I'm absolutely certain on this point, and it's not something that I think has really been brought up in the media. A expert witness is not allowed to make a comment on whether they think somebody's testimony is accurate or not. So whether they're lying or not, they're not allowed to
Mhm.
say that, because that's a factual matter for the court. Now, an
Yeah,
expert
that's the
such
jury.
as
Sure.
an expert such as Shannon Curry is allowed to say these symptoms are inconsistent with PTSD, and then the
Yeah.
jury is allowed to fill in the gaps and make their conclusion. Or I think that the symptomatology she's describing can be described by another illness like depression, but not PTSD. You're allowed to say those things, but you're not allowed to say whether somebody's lying or not.
The conditions or disorders she talked about, are they compatible with PTSD? Like, could somebody have PTSD and those conditions?
Yeah, somebody could have PTSD and those conditions, absolutely, but they're not the same symptoms. They're two completely different sets of symptoms. Just like somebody with anxiety can have depression, but they're not the same thing.
Okay, I'm just curious. That's why I'm here to learn.
Sure.
Okay, so that's your issue with that. Now, Don Hughes.
Can I just say one other thing
Please.
about Shannon Curry, just because I think it's really important, is that I was reading in articles that she was criticised for this. She was taken out for dinner by Johnny Depp's legal team before they decided to take her on. And as I was explaining before, a expert witness is supposed to be completely objective and neutral, and I think that is slightly dodgy. It's not illegal and it's not breaking the expert witness rules per se, but I think it's bordering on unethical because, so from my experience, I've been instructed in not this kind of, high profile celebrity defamation case, but say, for example, like a road traffic accident. So I assess the client and my ultimate question is, did they develop PTSD because of this accident? And if they did, then they get more compensation. If they didn't, they get less compensation. So a solicitor is allowed to, and certainly have in the past, approached me and asked me about my expertise. So, Dr. Das, can you diagnose PTSD? Can you send me your CV by phone? But I've never in my career, I'm doing hundreds of these cases, ever met them in person before the trial. And I've definitely never been taken out for dinner, and I've never had drinks bought from me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, to me, it kind of, I can't say for definite because I wasn't at that dinner and I didn't know what was discussed.
Is it a U.S. thing versus a British thing, or is it just a professional? Yeah, I don't know that too.
I've got to be honest with you, Eric. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it'd be the same in the States. They shouldn't be coaching her or agreeing to take her on, depending on what she says she is going to conclude. They're allowed to meet with her to ask her if she's able to take on the case, like whether she's diagnosed PTSD before, whether she's seen, these kind of acrimonious defamation trials before. They're allowed to ask her that, but
Sure.
you don't need dinner and drinks to ask somebody that. So I just think it's all a bit dodgy, personally.
Okay, fair enough. Now, Don Hughes.
So Dawn Hughes, unsurprisingly, had the exact opposite conclusion that Shannon Curry did. So she diagnosed no personality disorder and she diagnosed a presence of PTSD. I think, again, it's really hard for me to know exactly what is accurate and what isn't without having assessed Amber Heard in it directly. The first thing for me, the most important thing is, did the abuse by Johnny Depp, the alleged abuse, occur? Because what Amber Heard said was pretty horrific, being sexually assaulted many, many times with a bottle, feeling in threat of her life. If those things are true, then that is compatible with PTSD. It doesn't automatically mean she's got PTSD, but it's compatible with it. If they're not true, then it's incompatible with that diagnosis. So that's the first thing I think that needs to be established.
I'm going to cheat and see if I get things right, or things that I see as potentially a problem or an issue in my humble opinion. Is it odd? And they did a poor job on Cross, I feel. And again, I'm watching this partly for the mechanics. I'm interested in the mechanics and methodology of how people are working. This individual, it appears, has never treated a male victim with a female aggressor. And that was kind of asked, but they never asked it the way I did just now. They just kept saying, did you ever have male? Yes, of course, children. Okay, well, what about, yes, same sex. And it was never this exact scenario. And every time it came up, it was always he. It seemed to be, if we're looking at pronouns, very male centric toward violence. And I it could be completely wrong, but it seemed like all of the work and the history of Don Hughes is very much for battered women and things. And by the way, great, good for her. I mean, there are a lot of battered women. It's incredibly important. But I do always worry that, is somebody an activist or is somebody neutral? And I would just love to get your opinion on that.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So firstly, I wouldn't, if I was the judge, I wouldn't insist that the expert had experience of treating men who had been the victim of domestic violence from women, only because the actual science, the diagnosis behind it is pretty much the same. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if somebody should still understand the
Mhm.
psychiatric diagnoses behind it and still be
Mhm.
able to comment on the case. As to whether Dawn Hughes is sort of bringing in her bias as an activist, that is definitely feasible. It's definitely possible, and I think she is quite biased. I don't know. I don't know if it's. I can't say whether it's because she's an activist for
Mhm.
domestic violence against women, but I think she is biased for other reasons. Basically, because she has made it very clear that she believes that Johnny Depp was physically assaultative towards Amber Heard. And I think I mentioned this before, she's not allowed to say that. She's not allowed to say whether a factual thing occurred. She's allowed to say PTSD could be caused by this disorder.
Yeah,
And
she kind
Amber
of
Heard,
did. She kind of laid out Amber Heard's testimony before Amber Heard got there.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly. So I do think that's dodgy. As to the pronoun, that's a bit of a grey area for me. If I was giving evidence, and if it wasn't about a specific case, and you just asked me, say this Amber Heard Johnny Depp never happened, and you were just doing an interview, and you asked me victims of domestic violence versus perpetrators, I would automatically say he for the perpetrator and she for the victim, purely because in the number of cases that
numbers.
I've seen, overwhelmingly, probably about 10-1, it's been that way around.
Sure.
I think probably there are more cases where the males are the victims that are not known about, because I think there's a stigma and an embarrassment of
Mhm.
men being the victims. But that's what I would naturally say. Having said all of that, this isn't a hypothetical case. This is actually a case. So she is intentionally or otherwise making an inference by saying he rather than she. So yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to know whether she's doing it
She could
intentionally or
back
not.
off and say the aggressor would do blah blah blah,
Yeah. Yeah. She
or
could.
the victim, the aggressor, the assailant. I mean, I've heard a lot of scientists and doctors kind of back away from he she, which is more intimate, and go into the suspect and this, or like a cop would say the suspect or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the ultimate question is: did she do that accidentally because she was just thinking on the spot, and in her mind she's so used to he and
Sure.
she, or was she doing it intentionally to kind of sway or make underlying subtle suggestions that Johnny Depp was physically abusive? I don't think we'll actually know the answer to that.
No, and it's also one you can't really prove, and it's a strong accusations. It's just I would just say possibly an internal bias, not necessarily intentional. However,
Yeah,
the internal bias happens to line up with the paycheck, so that's always comfortable.
yeah,
I mean, you sleep better at night when your bias lines up with who's paying you versus the other, or at least you sleep in a better bed. So, on that note, Dr. Das, thank you so much. Now, people can find you at a site for sore minds.
yeah. That's right. That's my YouTube channel. So it's like true crime with a twist of psychiatry, profiling high-profile true crime cases, serial killers, etc., etc. My own psychoanalysis. So yeah, hope to see some of your viewers there. It'll be a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me on, Eric. Nice to speak to you.